live. Well, technically not live. We are live on this podcast, recording as of this moment. But, folks, this is episode number 4 of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with Kenneth, the K-Rock Cline, your host. And, folks, it's going to be a real interesting show for you today. As we can all see, we are getting ready for the NFL draft, and I would be very excited, very happy to know that I'm going to be sitting down, enjoying watching the draft, and watching to see what my Houston Texans are going to do in the first round. If we have a first round pick, that is. Well, we'll see what happens if we trade up to the first round or to the second round. But anyways, folks, we got some real interesting topics to talk about right now. First thing we're going to talk about, of course, is the fashion game that the Houston Texans pulled off when they had their new uniforms released, and I'm going to give out my honest opinion thoughts. I'm trying desperately not to be like the late Joan Rivers in the Fashion Police, or the people that you might see on the red carpet interviews talking about, oh, what an exciting outfit you're wearing, or, oh, wow, look at that stud, he's wearing a jacket and all that. I mean, come on, really? That's a little bit lame, but I'm going to give my honest takes on that matter. And then, just to be sure that this is not just a Houston sports podcast, I'm going to be talking about something that happened today. I'm talking, of course, about Reggie Bush, the former great USC running back who got his Heisman Trophy after losing it because of these allegations and all that, and how much this affects the whole landscape of college athletics in general. But first, folks, it's time for a random question of the day, which is basically where I ask myself a question and I answer it for you guys to get to know me a little bit more. The question that I received today is, what is one thing that you wish you would have learned a whole lot sooner? One thing that I wish I would have learned a whole lot sooner. That's a very good question. There are some things that I wish I could have learned a lot, but I don't know if I would like to answer those for the sake of those people that still believe in the things that they believe in at this point. But I think the one thing that I wish I could have learned a whole lot sooner is saying the words "I love you" doesn't necessarily mean in a romantic way. Basically, there's two kinds of "I love yous" for people who say that. There's the kind that you say to your parents, your siblings, your relatives, maybe a close friend or so, just kind of expressing that because that's the way you do, because you love that person. And then there's the "I love you" in which you say it to that significant person that you really have a major crush on, Like, when I was a young kid, for some reason, I used to think that saying "I love you" was kind of in a romantic way, especially with a person that I was really interested in. And I've had my fair share of small crushes on girls and everything. So, like, for instance, if there was a girl that I really liked who came up to me and said, "I love you," I might be thinking to myself, she's really interested in me. She wants me. She's got feelings for me as a crush. And I'm a little embarrassed to say that I haven't had a date in my entire life, let alone a girlfriend. I mean, I've been on a few hangouts with some girls and all that, and I have some very close girlfriends, and they tell me that they love me. And, the younger version of me might get it misconstrued and say that she's interested in me, but in reality, it's actually just friends. And I'm like that, and I like that way. But I do hope one day that I do find that special girl who tells me she loves me, but not in a more than friend kind of way, I mean, it's kind of embarrassing at times when you're 33 and you're single, and yeah, you kind of get that feeling. I'm sure there are a lot of guys out there that are in my shoes at this point, haven't had a date, and they're in their 30s and all that, but, maybe it's probably best that you wait until you find that right person in your 30s. I know that I've had some friends of mine that have gotten married in their 20s and right out of college, which I will admit is a little bit risque, but hey, so far it's working out for them, and I hope it stays that way for them in the future as well. So that is one thing I would like to have learned a lot sooner is "I love you" isn't always meant in a romantic way. And speaking of "I love you," I love that this is going to be the first segment that we're going to talk about. We're going to go right to the new uniforms of the Houston Texans. Do I like them? Could I have some question marks and maybe some updates on them if I could? Yeah, let's get into that. We'll be right back in just a bit. So, big news that happened in the Houston Texans landscape. Well, not necessarily for any acquisitions that they've had in the past or any potential draft players that they're going to be picking up in the NFL draft starting in the second round, unless, of course, Nick Caserio decides to trade up in the first round. No, this is actually something that involves them as a brand, particularly with the new uniforms. Now, it had been teased a lot throughout the recent months that the Houston Texans were, in fact, going to get some new uniforms, and I can honestly sit here and say that I'm glad that they were going down that route because, we've never had a uniform change. The franchise has never had a uniform change in their franchise history. And to tell you the truth, I was really curious to see how this was all going to play out because while I do like the uniform and everything, I think it was time for a change, especially since the franchise is moving into a new, different era in a sense. And definitely time for a change, and hopefully this will be a huge benefit to the fans and to the franchise with the new uniforms that they selected. But the reason why I felt like it was time for a change from the Texans to get new uniforms was because I really think when you look back when you think about the Texans, you don't necessarily think about people from Houston. You think about, they're people, I'm from Houston, I'm a Texan, or I'm from Dallas, I'm a Texan. I'm from Austin, I'm a Texas. I'm from El Paso, San Antonio, Waco, Lubbock, Galveston, Alpine for that matter, Abilene as well. They're all Texans. I mean, if you were born and raised in a state of Texas, you are considered to be a Texan. And I think what Bob McNair, the late owner of the Texans, who is the father of current Texans owner Cal McNair, I think what he was trying to do was try to resemble something of a pride for people that live in the state of Texas, particularly in the city of Houston. And when they first came out with that name, I was like, okay, that's a very cool, interesting name. I mean, sure, there are some better options you could have gone with as well. One in particular that, unfortunately, is a result beef that probably won't ever get resolved unless something changes. But that, of course, being the Houston Oilers, who, as we now know, are currently the Tennessee Titans. And I'll get more into the new uniforms and the situation with the Titans in just a moment. But I was thinking more about this. Like, Houston needed a new uniform because what they had didn't really represent the city of Houston itself. Like, you want to stand out. You want to have an identity that makes you stand out from everyone else. You don't want to go with something along the lines of similar teams and everything. Like, you think about the Pittsburgh Steelers, steel country. You have steel workers there. Pittsburgh is one of the best when it comes to producing steel and everything. That's why they call themselves the Pittsburgh Steelers, and it's a blue-collar city. You think about the Green Bay Packers with the products of the dairy in the state of Wisconsin and everything. And the fact that it's also a publicly owned team, that's a different matter. The 49ers, you're talking about all the diggers and the miners back in 1849 that dug up gold in the San Francisco Valley in California. I mean, you've got to come up with an identity for the city. And I felt like the Texans just weren't doing it because, unfortunately, in the state of Texas, at least 90% of the state are diehard Dallas Cowboy fans, and for good reason. I mean, you can't just have a Texan living in Dallas and say, oh, I'm a Texans fan, because I don't think they would identify with it. You have to have something that sort of stood out as a city. So I was curious to know what the Texans were going to do as far as the uniforms were concerned. I like the logo. Don't get me wrong. I like the logo, but I wanted to see what they were really all about. And needless to say, I like these uniforms. I think I like all four of them. Now, some I like more than others, but I definitely am a very huge fan of the Texans and the upgrades for the brands. You have all these incredible uniforms. There's the alternate road uniforms, the whites and everything, where they have the what you would normally see from a side would be a stripe, but if you look at it from a front perspective, they're like bull's horns, like the bull's horns, which I thought were very interesting. It makes it seem very intimidating because you have the symbol of the bull, which is kind of like the animal of Texas, in my personal opinion, and it should be the animal of Texas, is the bull. But you have that. You also have the home uniforms, which are a little bit more deep steel blue, which I found out was kind of similar to the home blue or dark blue that the Yankees kind of had on their uniforms. It's a little bit more towards that. And the Texans apparently had that uniforms when they first came out, but for some reason, Nike, the company that did those uniforms, kind of stayed away from it for a while. But then I guess the Texans decided they wanted to go back to honor their past and everything, and they got permission from Nike, and so they ended up getting these dark blue uniforms and everything. Like, I can understand why some people look at it and think, oh, it's kind of black in a way, but it's definitely one that I'm truly interested in. And the number fonts, a little bit of an adjustment here, but still, it almost feels like the old uniforms from back in the old days when the Texans were in their infancy period as well. Then you have the battle red uniforms. Now, those are uniforms that I really liked, and the old ones had the white font numberings on there, but now they filled in the numbering, and it's a little bit more deep steel bluish coloring as well, which I really liked. And also, they have the same horns on the side, like the ones on the alternate white uniforms, and I'm really impressed with this. I mean, this is the uniform that I truly liked. And also, it goes along well with the helmet of having the horns on the side as well. Now, most people probably aren't big fans of that helmet and the battle reds and all that, and I can understand where they're coming from, but I really like it. I truly think this is definitely going to be one that's going to stand out and make people excited over time and growing, just like all the other uniforms in this case. But I truly am a huge fan of these battle reds, and I definitely like it as well. And then, before I get to the fourth one, let me just say that on the back of the necks, on the back of the neck collars of each of these jerseys, you have H-Town on it. Let's be real, people. It's called H-Town. It's not Hugh Town, Dan Patrick, former ESPN Sports Center analyst. I like you, Dan, but come on now. You and your crew need to get with the program here. And then, obviously, there are other people that probably don't like the whole thing, and we'll deal with that later on. But, I mean, this is an H-Town thing. I definitely like the collars as well. Okay, so the one uniform that a lot of people were most worried about was this fourth alternate uniform, one that was for the fans. People saw this video link of a helmet that had nothing but the H logo. Now, this H logo was a new logo that had been designed. It's not the primary logo, but it's a new logo that had been designed when the marketing people were trying to come up with an experiment, something to represent their H-Town. And the H logo is actually something, it's called black letter font, like it's in black letter font, but it almost feels, but it's kind of like an old English style font that you would normally see when you're reading like the Declaration of Independence or medieval novels or pictures or documents and all of that, just like in that kind of font. And a lot of people were a little bit skeptical. To understand where I'm going with this, look up the logo for Rice University. Look up the R in Rice University. It has that same font as well. That's something that the H of the logo on the helmet and also on the back kind of has with their new looks and everything. But they have it on the back of the necks as well, the H. And I was a little bit skeptical about how that helmet was going to play out. And then all of a sudden, here come the uniforms. And I tell you what, call me biased if you will, but I really like these uniforms. It's kind of deep steel bluish like the other one, but the font is red, and it has a little bit of light Houston blue outside of it. And it's definitely going to show a lot of people that why this is H-Town and not Hugh-Town or anything. This isn't Hueytown, Alabama, okay? This is Houston, Texas. We nickname ourselves H-Town here, right? Now, I haven't lived in Houston for some time, but I still consider it my home. I'm still a Houstonian at heart, and I love these uniforms. I am a huge fan of those. I cannot wait to get my hands on the uniforms as well. But that brings me to another interesting point that a lot of people were talking about. They said that the Texans were going to try to honor the past, meaning the Houston Oilers, with the Columbia Blue circumstance. The Columbia Blues, which is what the old Houston Oilers wore. And you're thinking to yourself, how is that going to work out? Because unfortunately, the Tennessee Titans have the rights to those uniforms. This goes all the way back to when Bud Adams, the former owner of the Oilers turned Tennessee Titans, decided to move his team from Houston to Nashville. And the city of Houston didn't really do anything, make an effort to try to regain those uniforms because there were some bitter feelings towards the owner. And to be fair, it's not like Bud Adams was a saint either. I mean, he was a controversial owner at times with some of the things he did, but it was just unfortunate that they couldn't get a new deal in, because I know the Oilers wanted to play in a new stadium aside from the Astrodome because it was getting kind of old and all of that. But the city just wasn't willing to buy into the shenanigans of Bud Adams, and he decided to take the team to Nashville and everything. So because of that, the city of Houston has had this battle where they think, well, it should be the Houston Oilers. The Houston Oilers should be ours. And the Tennessee Titans are like, no, it's our claim. We have it. You don't. Deal with it. And this is one of those cases where I think both sides are wrong in this argument. The Houston is wrong because they had an opportunity to retain the rights to uniforms. I mean, there was the Cleveland Browns, who before 1995 had been in Cleveland, but then they moved to Baltimore, where they became the Baltimore Ravens. And then after a few years, when the Browns finally got their team back, they requested all the historical rights from the from the Baltimore Ravens back to Cleveland. So everything that was in Cleveland Browns history that used to be part of Baltimore when they first existed is back in Cleveland. I think the same situation is going to happen in the NBA. If the Seattle Supersonics were to come back, they're going to ask the Oklahoma City Thunder, the team that moved from Seattle to Oklahoma City, for the historical rights of Seattle. And I think that's what Oklahoma City is going to do. I could be wrong. I hope that's the case. But Seattle obviously deserves an NBA team, and I think they'll get it, and I think they'll get their historical rights, because I do think that you need to honor your great players like Gary Payton, Sean Kemp, Sam Perkins, Dennis Johnson, and all those guys. All the great players that played for Seattle. A huge respect for them and their fan base as well. But the problem here is that the Adams family, no, not Gomez or Morticia or Uncle Fester. I'm talking, of course, about Amy Adams, Bud Adams, and their family. They're not going to give up the rights to the Oiler uniforms. And I think that's wrong, but sadly, that's just their personal opinion. And I think it's just inexcusable. It's really terrible, because when I think of Nashville, Tennessee, I haven't been there yet, but from what I've seen, it's a lovely city. When I think of Nashville, Tennessee, I think of country music. I think of, NASCAR races or anything, or also a great sports market. Aside from the Titans, you have the Nashville Predators, which is also there. I just think, what part of Nashville, Tennessee has an oil refinery or so? I'm just not picturing it. If there is, I apologize. I need to go down to Nashville and see for myself, but I just don't see it right now in Nashville. Why it makes sense for Nashville, who has the Tennessee Titans, which makes sense because there's a Parthenon replica like the one you see in Athens, Greece, but there's actually a Parthenon replica in Nashville. It makes sense for them to have it there, or have themselves called the Titans because of that. It doesn't make sense for them to call themselves the Oilers and yet give it up. That's why I think the Tennessee Titans are a snake-bit franchise, is because they have refused to give up the rights of the Houston Oilers back to the city of Houston because of some bitter feelings towards the organization. And that was made evident clear when last year the Titans decided that they were going to bring back the throwback Oiler uniforms, and they decided that one of those games they were going to wear it was a home game against, you guessed it, the Houston Texans. And boy, oh boy, that was a big game. It was the something old versus the something new. It was I mean, it wouldn't be called a great game as far as, dramatics and everything, but from a personal and pride standpoint, it was a great game. And ultimately, the Houston Texans came away 19-16 winners and really stuck it right to the Titans. They took the disrespect very personally, and they got a big win out of that. But even more embarrassing was when Titans head coach Mike Vrabel was dressed up like a cowboy to pay homage to Bum Phillips, which was another terrible move because I believe it was Bud Adams who, after 1980, decided to fire Bum Phillips because of the lack of playoff success or not being able to get to the Super Bowl. But that was a very, very terrible thing to do from a Tennessee Titans perspective. And I know that a lot of Titans fans, they don't really care about Houston Oilers history. They care about Titans history. This is a division rivalry that is based on the uniforms, and it's going to be like that for a while. So I understand that the Titans had to allow some form of Columbia blue, which isn't really Columbia blue. It's more Houston blue. I mean, if you look on the city's flag, it's the blue that the city flag of Houston is resembled of. It's more of the city itself. More on that in just a moment, but this is the divisional rivalry that is going to be something heated up because of this uniform debate. It would be one thing if the Tennessee Titans were just an expansion team who happened to be in the AFC South and who was a very good team, and we would have some good battles, and they'd be considered a rival of ours, but really just a good, respectful divisional opponent, just like Jacksonville and Indianapolis. But instead, it's a rivalry because, as I said, it's a case of something old versus something new. The Titans used to be the Houston Oilers. The Oilers, Houston has the Texans now. So we're talking about battling something old versus something new. And yet, even in Houston, they still love the Oilers. They still want the Houston Oilers back. And yet it's going to be really tough because Amy Adams Strunk is going to have to get her head out of her new, you-know-what, put her ego aside and say, all right, fine, here, take your team back and everything. But then it's almost like, okay, what then? We might have some honors of the Oilers, but we're not going to call ourselves the Houston Oilers. We may wear their uniforms for a day or so, but we're still going to be the Texans unless Cal McNair decides, you know what? We should probably go back to being the Oilers, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. And this is kind of one of those rivalry things that is really unfortunate from the perspective of what's right for this team and what's right for this franchise and for the city as well, because you're still going to have people in Houston that love the Oilers, and you're still going to have people in Houston that love the Texans now. So it's one of those things that really needs to be resolved. Hopefully it gets resolved eventually, but for now, this is going to be a debate that's going to overtake it. I can't wait to see the Texans in these new uniforms. As a matter of fact, I was thinking about this the other day. If the Titans tried to stump the Texans by wearing the Oiler uniforms in their game in which the Texans won in overtime, do you think the Texans are going to put those alternate uniforms with the Houston blue Columbia when the Titans come to town? Do you think Hannah McNair or Cal McNair or the Texans would be good enough to maybe say, you know what, they tried to do it on us and it didn't work. Why don't we try to do it on them and see if it works? Do you think they'd be good? Do you think they would try it? I don't know. That would be surprised. That would be a good opportunity and good idea. Although I would say maybe a more prominent game would be used, maybe against Kansas City or Baltimore. I have to check the schedule out when it comes out. Maybe if the game was in Dallas. Now that's an interesting game. If it was like a Thanksgiving Day game in Dallas, and the Texans wore those uniforms, I would be all for it, for the matter. But even with people that like this uniform, there are unfortunately people that are not going to like this uniform, and there are some national media pundits that kind of question it as well. And I say to all those national media pundits, you know something? The problem is you just still don't understand Houston's culture. There's a different pride in the city of Houston. And if you don't understand it, and if you don't experience it, if you don't travel down to Houston and don't experience it for yourselves, you're really wasting your time trying to come up with some lame L takes, man. it's been Houston versus everybody, and I feel like it's going to be that way for a while unless Houston continues to get on this winning mentality and win some titles, which hopefully should happen a little bit more in this decade. I did make a guarantee on my other podcast, Two Pals on a Pod, where I guaranteed that the Astros, the Texans, and the Rockets were going to win a championship this decade. So far, the Astros have won their championship. Now we just got to wait for the Texans and the Rockets to get theirs. It's 2024, so we got about 5 more years, and it's possible. I mean, I'm hoping, I'm knocking on some wood here, hoping that it does happen, and I'm still good, but I've already accepted the fact that if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but hopefully it does happen. So, but yeah, for all the media members that don't understand it, that say, oh, we failed to honor the Oilers. We're not honoring the Oilers, okay? We're honoring the city of Houston. We're honoring the pride of Houston. That's something that you lack. And even if we try to honor the Oilers, we can't because, again, the Adams family has the rights in Tennessee. So that's the really unfortunate thing about all of this is that they have the power. They have the rights. And it seems like the only realistic way that we're going to give it up is if, God rest her soul, when this does happen, that the strong matriarch unfortunately passes away and her family has a change of heart. But that's something that may not be resolved for a while. But you know what? I think if you would have it any other way, it should be the Houston Texans proving that they are Houston's team and doing something that not even the Oilers can do, and that's win a Super Bowl. Hopefully that does happen. But again, I'm a huge fan of these uniforms. Maybe it's just a biased opinion. I know you guys probably might have some different opinions and all that. I'm sure I'm going to have people that say, oh, I love them as well, or I'm not sure. I mean, I like this one, I like that one, but that one I'm not quite sold up on it. Listen, sometimes the best uniforms are usually the ones that take a while for you to grow on. And I think that's what's going to happen right here. I mean, I saw the other uniforms. I saw Denver's uniform. I saw Detroit's uniform, and I saw the Jets' uniforms, and they're all okay. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I like Detroit's new look and all, but man, I think it's safe to say Houston's not only won the free agent game or the draft game last year, but they seem to have won the fashion game. That's the way I look at it as well. And hopefully that gives them something back as far as respect from all the people and the fans in the National Football League when the Texans start winning. And speaking of giving back, we're going to step aside, but when we come back, we are going to be talking about Reggie Bush, who after a while finally got his Heisman Trophy back. My thoughts on that when we return. We have some big-time breaking news. Well, I say breaking news, but something that did happen this morning as of this podcast that has brought to my attention, and I am definitely very excited. And that was, of course, that Reggie Bush, the former USC Trojans running back, who also spent some time in the NFL with the New Orleans Saints and the Miami Dolphins, to name a few teams, is getting his Heisman Trophy back. And I tell you what, that is a big-time victory, because Reggie Bush, to me, was one of the most dynamic college athletes of all time. The talented running back who had the flash and the ability to make headfirst dives and flip over in the end zone while being part of that great USC Trojan teams that won back-to-back national championships, which, let's be real, it's 2 national championships. One might not still be there at the time, but still, this is a big deal for the USC faithful. It's a big deal for Reggie Bush, and it's a big deal for college athletics. Now, I work at an NCAA Division I university, so I don't want to come across as being very critical of the circumstances here to the NCAA. But as I said, I am very excited for Reggie Bush getting his Heisman Trophy back, and I really think he deserved to have it back. But first and foremost, to understand what led up to this, let's go back. Reading an article here from Yahoo Sports about this earlier. Bush won his Heisman Trophy back in 2005, but it was essentially repossessed in 2010 after an NCAA investigation, which was spurred by extensive investigative reporting by Yahoo Sports, kind of ironic because I'm reading an article from them, found that Bush had received impermissible benefits from marketing agents while he was a student athlete. USC had to vacate all wins Bush participated in while ineligible, including the 2004 Trojans' 2004 BCS National Championship, and his stats from that season were nullified. Those findings also resulted in an NCAA-mandated break between Bush and USC, which ended in 2020 when the university officially welcomed Bush back into the fold. A year later, Bush made his intentions clear. He wanted his Heisman Trophy back, and he wanted the NCAA to reinstate his records. He and his team had reached out to the NCAA and a Heisman Trust, but hadn't heard back. The Heisman Trust wasn't moved by Bush's plea and refused to return his 2005 trophy to him until the NCAA reinstated him. And despite the NIL rules changing, the NCAA said it wouldn't be making any changes to his stats. Now, he was elected to the College Football Hall of Fame despite having his Heisman Trophy vacated, but his desire to reclaim his trophy had not diminished. And he announced that he was suing the NCAA for defamation in the hopes of forcing him to reinstate his records, which could have also led to him getting his trophy back. Now, even without the suit having been resolved, the Heisman Trust will reinstate Bush on Wednesday and return his trophy. It's unclear whether this will have any bearing on Bush's standing with the NCAA or the lawsuit. But this is the thing. Reggie Bush, regardless of what may or may not have happened, still won the Heisman Trophy. He was still the best player in college football that season. And I think it's a little bit unfortunate that he had to go through this. Because in my personal opinion, even though Reggie Bush won a Super Bowl with the New Orleans Saints, he never quite had the career that I think he would have liked to have had. And I think part of it had to do with the whole off-field situation. That and, of course, dating a Kardashian, but that's a different story for another day. But the fact is that Reggie Bush was deserving the Heisman Trophy winner. He won 784 first-place votes in a Heisman Trophy. Think about it. The final three, the nominees for that year's Heisman Trophy class were Reggie Bush, his teammate Matt Leinart, who had won it the previous year, and Vince Young from the University of Texas. Reggie Bush received 784 votes, first-place votes. That is complete dominance, especially when you consider Vince Young, who had himself a tremendous season, and also Matt Leinart, who was kind of a catalyst for that year and also won it the year before. But I had no problem with Reggie Bush winning the Heisman Trophy award for a couple of reasons. Number one, USC was clearly the best team in all of college football at that time. There was not a single team out there from 2003 to 2004 that could have challenged USC. Oklahoma tried, they failed. Notre Dame tried, they almost did, but they got kind of lucky USC kind of got lucky because of that Bush push, which led to USC scoring a winning touchdown to keep their undefeated streak alive. The only team that really challenged him and did beat him, of course, was Texas, and that's for my second reason. Having Reggie Bush win his Heisman Trophy back only elevates Vince Young's legendary Rose Bowl performance even more. Vince Young doing what he did against USC in the national championship game that year was like what Hakeem Olajuwon did to David Robinson in the 95 Western Conference Finals when David Robinson was the league MVP that season. And Hakeem Olajuwon, who won the award the previous year, saw the presentation right on court and said, "That's my trophy. I'm taking it." Sure enough, Olajuwon went toe-to-toe with Robinson, or actually, he did more than just go toe-to-toe. He outplayed the league MVP, and the Rockets, of course, won that playoff series in 6 games, one of the greatest performances of all time. So, I really thought that Reggie Bush deserved his Heisman Trophy. Now, I can't necessarily say all that happened, even though we do know that there had been some reports of that he received some impermissible benefits. But you look at where college athletics is at this time. This is the time where we are seeing players receiving some form of NIL rights for names, likeness, or name, image, and likeness. They're using it on sponsors. They're putting themselves all over, and they're doing things that are getting them some sort of payments. Not necessarily, with some restrictions, of course, but this is a different era in all of college football. And if Reggie Bush were playing at this time, I think this would not be a big issue. But the sad part is he was playing at a time when it was still illegal to have boosters or someone outside give you payments while you were a student athlete. And yet, Reggie Bush obviously was in a very unique situation, being that he in California, and he was playing for the best college football team at that time, and yet he was still having his remarkable campaign. So now you're thinking to yourself, well, this is a big deal for Reggie Bush as well. And shout out to Johnny Manziel, because Johnny Manziel said that he would not be attending any Heisman Trophy events until Reggie Bush got his Heisman Trophy back. Now, you might think and you say, well, that's a little bit crazy, but you know what? I support Johnny Manziel for doing this, even if it doesn't mean anything. And yet somehow it meant something. So that means that Johnny Manziel is going to go back to the Heisman Trophy events for future years. And that's the thing with Reggie Bush. Reggie Bush is invited to go back to New York every year, if he so chooses, to welcome in the next Heisman Trophy winner. Now, this is where it gets kind of complicated, because people are going to look at Reggie Bush and they're going to remember what happened at his time, the controversy and all that. And there may be questions as to, well, why did Reggie Bush lose his Heisman Trophy and why did he get it back? You have to understand, it was a very different time. The game has changed. We're seeing more people getting involved with name, image, and likeness nowadays. And, you know, college, of course, the NCAA has really had to make some adjustments to allow this to happen, but still have to put some very deep restrictions on it in this point. And thinking back to Reggie Bush, he ran for 1,740 yards on 200 carries and scored 18 touchdowns that season in 2005. I mean, he was worthy of being the best player in all of college football. Now, Bush had said that the NCAA had defamed him and that he wasn't paid to play football at USC, but unfortunately, this is a different era now, and I think Reggie Bush would probably prefer playing in this era now, where you can receive compensation and for your name, image, and likeness, henceforth the NIL. This goes all the way back to what I said on my first podcast, where you simply, or not my first podcast, but my second episode on this podcast, where I was talking about whether or not O.J. Simpson should be kicked out of the Hall of Fame in general. You can't erase history. Record books might and all that, but you can't really erase history. You know, the Michigan Fab Five team of Chris Webber, Jalen Rose, Juwan Howard, Ray Jackson, and Jimmy King. That team made it to back-to-back national championship games. They didn't win, but everyone remembers the impact they had on college basketball. Unfortunately, there's not a single banner up there at this point. Now, I know Michigan had, and that was because Chris Webber got involved in a financial issue with a booster for Michigan, and that led to Michigan removing their banners from that year and putting themselves on some probation and all that, and just removing their wins. And, you know, obviously that was an unfortunate situation, and I know things have kind of healed up between the Michigan program or so, but my thing is, people are going to remember Michigan being in those national championship games. Louisville's men's basketball team had their national championships stripped away because of another situation. But yet, people are going to remember Louisville winning the 2013 national championship. It's not mentioned in the record books now, but everyone's going to say that Louisville was the winner of the national championship game. Michigan can argue, well, they deserve it now. If Louisville is not retained as the national championship, no one deserves it. Because the way I see it, if you didn't do enough to win the game, even if the team did something illegal or wrong, you are not deserving to win the national championship game. You do not deserve to call yourself champions because you didn't do enough to win. I would rather win with overcoming a situation like that than having somebody do something stupid and then having to give it to me. I'd rather earn things than have something given to me. But Reggie Bush clearly earned the Heisman Trophy, and it was taken away from him, or he actually voluntarily gave it up with some regret. But he kept fighting back, and he said that I wasn't paid to play in USC. I deserve my Heisman Trophy, and he had some support. He had some volunteers. It took a while for the NCAA to come back, but I think because of the change in landscape of what's happening now, the Heisman Trust have decided that Reggie Bush is the rightful owner of the Heisman Trophy. People are not going to like it. People might still say Vince Young deserves to win the Heisman Trophy, which I can understand where they're coming from, but at the end of the day, it didn't really matter. Reggie Bush received 748 votes to win the Heisman Trophy that year. And if you're asking me, Reggie Bush has been and always will be the 2005 Heisman Trophy winner, even if he never got that Heisman Trophy back. But I definitely think that this was a big win for college athletics in general, because the NCAA is recognizing that this is a different time. We have so much for these student athletes to get compensated for NIL. And yes, we still have the transfer portal, and that's possibly a podcast subject for another time. But I really, truly think Reggie Bush needed to have his Heisman Trophy back, and I'm glad he got his Heisman Trophy back. Now that just begs the question of some of the other things that have happened previously and whether or not things are going to be reinstated or so. Obviously, Louisville's national championship, is that going to be reinstated? Are you going to have the Final Four or runner-up national championship banners for Michigan back up? I mean, I'm seeing people expressing that as a top 5 sports wish that to happen, which was, one of them being Reggie Bush getting his Heisman Trophy back. But then you're seeing people say, well, Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame even though he gambled on baseball, or Barry Bonds should be in the Hall of Fame even though he might have been linked to steroids. Same thing with Roger Clemens and all that. Personally, I agree with all those assessments. I think the Baseball Hall of Fame needs to get their act together and forget about being so pure and traditionalist and just let bygones be bygones, because those guys really made the sport of baseball elevate, and now it's kind of gone downhill to be secondary to football as well. But I mean, I want to say congratulations to Reggie Bush and to USC because they get a Heisman Trophy winner back. I know they've definitely had some other issues, with some other running backs as well, but that is a huge win for them today. It may not be the 3rd straight national championship, but at least it feels glorified like a national championship for the USC Trojans. So Reggie Bush got his Heisman Trophy back, and I think he is deserving of keeping it once and for all. And speaking of once and for all, we are going to come back to close out the show with my final thoughts on a segment. Stay tuned. So, what did we learn today? Hey, K-Rock, what do you say? We all want to know what you learned today. Nah, just from some silly child show I used to watch growing up as a kid. But, anyways, what we learned today is that time does heal all wounds, and mistakes that happened previously can be forgiven, even if not everyone likes it. And I'm sure Reggie Bush is going to go home happy that he got his Heisman Trophy back. He's probably going to be sleeping with it, looking at it and say, oh yeah, you are mine forever, mine forever. We learned that there's always going to be an argument over who gets to wear what and where. I mean, you see that nowadays with women arguing over that someone else is wearing the same dress as they're wearing and everything, and it's a bit of a petty argument, people, okay? Like, it's just a dress. It shouldn't matter how you look like. It's just a matter of what's on the inside that counts. And then, of course, we learned that saying I love you is okay, even if it's not meant in a romantic way. So to everyone, even though this is only the 4th episode, I love you, and I hope to see you guys soon, next time, on this edition of Crocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock.